The howling wind sent dust swirling across the weathered porch of the Sweetwater Saloon as Willa Reed clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, wondering if she'd ever feel warm again, not just from the biting cold of the Montana winter of 1876, but from the chill that had settled in her heart since losing everything she held dear. The small frontier town of Whispering Pines had changed little in the 8 years since she'd left as a bright-eyed 17-year-old, full of dreams and promises of return. Now at 25, Willa was back a widow with calloused hands, a weary soul, and nothing but the clothes on her back and a small leather pouch containing her life's meager savings. Miss Reed. "Your room is ready," said the portly innkeeper, his gray mustache twitching with curiosity about the young woman who'd arrived on the afternoon stage. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," Willa replied, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And it's Mrs. Carson now, or it was." The innkeeper's expression softened. "My condolences, Mrs. Carson. Your pa would have been mighty pleased to see you home, God rest his soul." The mention of her father sent a pang through Willa's chest. She'd returned too late, 2 months too late to say goodbye to the man who'd raised her alone after her mother died of consumption when Willa was just 5. "I appreciate your kindness," she said, collecting her single bag. "I'll be staying a while, there's business to attend to. Business indeed." The letter from her father's lawyer had stated clearly that Thomas Reed had left his daughter his modest ranch, 5 miles outside of town. What the letter hadn't explained was why her childhood home had been mortgaged to the Territorial Bank, or why the payments were 3 months overdue. The creaking floorboards announced her path to room number 4, where Willa found a small but clean space with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the town's main street. She unpacked her few belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, and a small daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Exhaustion tugged at her bones, but Willa knew sleep would elude her. Instead, she washed her face in the cold water from the pitcher, pinned her chestnut hair back into its severe bun, and decided to venture downstairs for a hot meal before confronting her ghosts at her father's her ranch tomorrow. The saloon portion of the establishment buzzed with the energy of Saturday night. Cowboys fresh from the trail, miners from the hills, and town folk all mingled in a haze of tobacco smoke and whiskey fumes. Willa kept her eyes down, uncomfortable with the stares her entrance garnered. Respectable women were still scarce in these parts. "Mrs. Carson," Mr. Holloway called out, "there's a quiet table in the corner if you'd prefer." Willa nodded gratefully and made her way through the crowd, ignoring the whispered comments and appreciative glances. She was halfway to her destination when a large body stumbled backward into her path, nearly knocking her over. Strong hands steadied her before she could fall, and Willa found herself looking up into the face of a stranger, a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. For a heartbeat, something familiar flickered in their depths, but she dismissed it. She'd never forget those eyes if she'd seen them before. "My apologies, madam," the stranger said, his voice deep and rumbling. He tipped his worn Stetson and stepped aside, allowing her to pass. "No harm done," Willa replied curtly, continuing to her table. Throughout her simple meal of beef stew and cornbread, Willa felt the weight of someone's gaze. She refused to look up, focusing instead on the plans she needed to make. Tomorrow she would visit the bank, then ride out to the ranch to assess its condition. If necessary, she'd sell it, though the thought of strangers living in her childhood home made her stomach clench. But practicality had been her companion these past 2 years, ever since influenza had taken her husband Edward and their infant son in one cruel week. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the tall stranger approach until his shadow fell across her table. "Excuse me," he said, his hat in his hands. "I don't mean to disturb your meal, but I believe this is yours." He held out a small silver locket, her mother's locket that she wore beneath her high-necked blouse. Willa's hand flew to her throat, finding the chain broken. "It must have snapped when we collided," the man explained. "I noticed it on the floor after you'd passed." "Thank you," Willa said, taking the precious keepsake. Their fingers brushed briefly, and an unexpected jolt of awareness shot through her. She quickly withdrew her hand. "It's very important to me," the stranger nodded, a half-smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I figured as much." He hesitated, then added, "Welcome back to Whispering Pines, Willa." Her head snapped up, eyes widening. No one here had called her by her given name. She'd been introduced only as Mrs. Carson. And there was something in the way he said it, the gentle caress of the syllables, the slight emphasis on the first L that stirred a distant memory. "Do I know you, sir?" she asked, studying his face more carefully. Beneath the weather-worn tan and the short beard, beneath the tiny scar that cut through his right eyebrow, there was something. The stranger's smile widened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "You once did, Willa girl, better than most." Only one person had ever called her that, one person whose face she tried desperately to forget for 8 long years. "Zachary," she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. "Zachary Blackwood," the man. Zachary nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Hello, Willa, it's been a long time." The room seemed to spin around her. Zachary Blackwood, her first love, her first heartbreak, the boy who'd promised forever and then disappeared without a word, was standing before her, a grown man now, watching her with those impossibly familiar eyes. "You're alive," she said stupidly, then felt heat rush to her cheeks. Zachary's expression darkened slightly. "Last I checked. I'm sorry that was, I just—" Willa gathered her composure. "No one knew what happened to you, you just vanished, not by choice," he said quietly. Then, glancing around at the curious onlookers, he added, "This isn't the place for that conversation." Willa nodded stiffly. "You're right, and I'm afraid I don't have time for it anyway. I have pressing matters to attend to tomorrow." Something like hurt flashed in Zachary's eyes, quickly masked. "Your father's ranch. You know about that. It's a small town, Willa, and I've been back for almost a year now. A year. He'd been here a year and never thought to write to her. But then, how could he have known where to find her? She'd left no forwarding address when she'd fled to Denver with Edward Carson, the traveling merchant who'd offered her escape from the memories that haunted every inch of Whispering Pines. "I see," she said, not seeing at all. "Well, thank you for returning my locket, Mr. Blackwood." "Zach," he corrected softly. "It's just Zach now." Before she could respond, he continued, "Your father was a good man, Willa, one of the best I've known. I'm sorry for your loss." The genuine sympathy in his voice threatened to crack her carefully constructed composure. "Thank you," she managed. An awkward silence stretched between them, 8 years of unspoken words and unanswered questions hanging in the air. Finally, Zach settled his hat back on his head. "I won't keep you any longer, but if you need help with the ranch, well, I know the property, I could be of assistance." Pride made Willa stiffen. "I'm sure I can manage." His lips quirked in that half-smile she remembered too well. "You always could. Good night, Willa girl." He turned and walked away, his tall frame moving easily through the crowded saloon. Willa watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing trying to break free. Zachary Blackwood was alive. He was here. And judging by her reaction to him, 8 years hadn't been nearly long enough to forget the boy who'd broken her heart. Morning arrived with a clarity that only the mountain air could bring. Willa dressed in her most respectable outfit, a dark blue traveling dress with a modest bustle and matching jacket, and pinned her hair into a neat chignon. First impressions were vital, especially when one was about to beg for an extension on a mortgage. The Territorial Bank of Montana occupied a solid brick building on the corner of Main Street and Pine Avenue. Inside, polished wood and the scent of furniture polish spoke of stability and prosperity qualities Willa desperately needed to project. "Mrs. Carson to see Mr. Delaney," she informed the young clerk, who directed her to a glass-paneled office at the back. Harold Delaney was a spare, serious man with wire-rimmed spectacles and thinning hair. He greeted Willa with formal courtesy, offering condolences for both her father and her husband, before getting down to business. "I'm afraid the situation is quite straightforward, Mrs. Carson," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "Your father took out a mortgage against the property 18 months ago. The payments are 3 months in arrears, and according to the terms, we are within our rights to foreclose. May I ask why my father needed the mortgage?" The ranch was paid for years ago. Delaney looked uncomfortable. That's not for me to say. What I can tell you is that he borrowed $800 with $350 still outstanding. Willa swallowed hard. $350 might as well have been $3,000. After paying for her journey from Denver, she had less than $40 to her name. How long do I have before foreclosure? She asked. 2 weeks. The notices have already been posted. 2 weeks. Willa's voice rose. Mr. Delaney, that's impossible. The ranch needs to be assessed, repairs made, possibly livestock purchased. I understand your position, Mrs. Carson, but the bank has been more than patient. We've already extended the grace period twice. Is there nothing that can be done? A payment plan, perhaps? Delaney hesitated. If you could pay half the outstanding amount immediately, we might consider extending the deadline by a month. Half would be $175, still far beyond her means. I'll need to think about my options, Willa said, rising. Thank you for your time. Outside, Willa leaned against the building, fighting back tears of frustration. Why had her father mortgaged the ranch? Where had the money gone? And how was she supposed to raise that kind of sum in 2 weeks? Bad news. Willa startled at the familiar voice. Zach Blackwood stood a few feet away, leading a magnificent chestnut gelding. Today, in the clear light of morning, she could see him properly. The years had been kind to him. The lanky boy had become a broad-shouldered man with strength evident in every line of his body. His dark hair was shorter than she remembered, and tiny lines had formed at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, she guessed. Nothing I can't handle, she replied, straightening her spine. Zach raised an eyebrow. Delaney's not known for his flexibility when it comes to loans. Were you eavesdropping, Mr. Blackwood? No, madam. Just making an observation based on the look on your face and the reputation of our local banker, Willa sighed. The ranch is about to be foreclosed upon. I have 2 weeks to come up with a small fortune or lose my inheritance. Zach frowned. Your father would never have let things get so bad unless, he stopped abruptly. Unless what? He shook his head. It's not my place to say. That's exactly what Mr. Delaney said, and I'm getting rather tired of people knowing more about my father's business than I do. Zach seemed to consider his words carefully. Your father was a proud man, Willa. He wouldn't have wanted his troubles known. Well, his troubles are my troubles now, she said sharply, and I have a right to know. You do, Zach conceded, but not from me and not on the street. Are you heading out to the ranch today? Willa nodded. As soon as I can hire a horse. No need for that. I've got business that way myself. I can drive you. Suspicion flared. What business? A flicker of amusement crossed his face, still as direct as ever. I've been helping manage some of the neighboring properties. Consulting work, you might call it. You, a ranch consultant. The boy she'd known had been skilled with horses but had never shown interest in the business side of ranching. People change, Willa. 8 years is a long time. The quiet rebuke in his voice made her flush. I apologize, that was rude. It was honest, he corrected. And I've always appreciated your honesty. He gestured to a wagon hitched nearby. My offer stands. It'll save you money, and I can fill you in on some of the changes around here. Practicality warred with pride. Pride lost. Thank you, I accept. The journey to the Reed Ranch took nearly an hour, most of it conducted in awkward silence. Willa stole glances at Zach's profile as he handled the reins with easy confidence. The boy she'd known had become a stranger, a handsome, self-assured stranger who made her uncomfortably aware of herself as a woman. So, she said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, you've been back a year, 13 months, he confirmed, eyes on the road. And you're a ranch consultant, his mouth quirked. Among other things, I did a stint with the cavalry after I left, learned tracking, spent time with some of the native tribes who were friendly to the government, picked up skills along the way. Why did you leave? The question that had burned in her heart for 8 years slipped out before she could stop it. Zach's hands tightened on the reins. That's a long story, Willa. We have time, he sighed deeply. I didn't leave by choice. I was forced out. By whom? Your father, Willa gasped. That's impossible. My father liked you. He always said you were a good worker, yes, a suitable friend for his daughter, but not a suitable husband. The blunt words hung between them. Husband? Willa repeated faintly. Zach turned to look at her directly, his eyes intense. I asked for your hand, Willa. The night before I disappeared, your father refused, said I had nothing to offer you. He was right. But you never said anything to me about marriage. We were so young, I was going to. I had it all planned. But your father made it clear that if I didn't leave town, he'd make sure I never found work in the territory again. He had the influence to do it too. Willa shook her head in disbelief. My father would never, he did, Zach said firmly, and I don't blame him. What was I? A 19-year-old orphan cowhand with no prospects and no future. You deserved better. You could have told me, Willa said, hurt and anger making her voice shake. You could have written. Instead, you just vanished, and I thought she broke off, unwilling to admit how many nights she'd lain awake, wondering if he was dead in a ditch somewhere. I did write, Zach said quietly. 6 letters. I never received a reply. Willa stared at him, stunned. I never got any letters. Understanding dawned in both their eyes simultaneously. He intercepted them, Willa whispered. My father kept your letters for me, Zach nodded slowly. It appears so. And you assumed I'd read them and didn't care enough to respond. Eventually, yes. The weight of 8 years of misunderstanding settled between them. Willa turned away, looking out at the familiar landscape rolling by. The mountain peaks in the distance, the rippling grasslands, the stands of pine and aspen all unchanged while her entire world had been altered by secrets and lies. I married someone else, she said quietly. I know, Edward Carson, news travels even to the Dakota Territory. He died 2 years ago, along with our son. Zach's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry, Willa, truly, she nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They crested a small rise, and suddenly there it was, the Reed Ranch, looking smaller and more weathered than she remembered. The whitewashed clapboard house with its wraparound porch. The large barn, its red paint faded to a dull rust. The corral, the bunkhouse, the storage sheds, all showing signs of neglect. Oh, Willa breathed, her heart sinking. It would take far more than she possessed to make this place profitable again. Zach pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard. It looks worse than it is, he said, as if reading her thoughts. The structures are sound. It's mostly cosmetic damage, and the livestock. Your father sold most of the cattle last year to keep up with the mortgage payments. There's only a small herd left, maybe 30 head, a couple of horses in the south pasture, chickens in the coop. How do you know all this? Zach climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her descend. His hands at her waist were impersonal, but Willa was acutely aware of their strength as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. I told you, I help manage neighboring properties, he said, releasing her quickly. Your father's land borders the Winston place to the south. I've been overseeing their operation for the past 6 months. I see. Willa turned slowly, taking in her childhood home with adult eyes. It needs work. Yes, but it has good bones, and the land is still some of the best grazing in the county. Willa nodded absently, already moving toward the house. The key was where it had always been, hidden beneath a loose board on the porch. Inside, the familiar scent of pine soap and wood smoke wrapped around her like an embrace. Her father's presence lingered in every corner, his pipe on the mantel, his books on the shelf, his chair drawn up to the cold hearth. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching objects, remembering. The kitchen where her father had taught her to make biscuits. The small bedroom that had been hers, the quilt her mother had pieced still covering the narrow bed. Her father's room, Spartan and neat, a man's room with few concessions to comfort. Zach remained respectfully by the front door, giving her space to reconnect with her past. When she returned to the main room, her eyes were dry but her heart full. Thank you for bringing me, she said. Of course. He hesitated. Willa, about the mortgage, I'll find a way, she said firmly. I don't doubt it, but there might be an option you haven't considered. Which is? A partner, someone to invest in the ranch, share the work and the profits. Willa frowned. I don't know anyone with that kind of money who'd be interested in a struggling cattle operation. Zach met her eyes steadily. You do now, understanding dawned. You want to buy into my ranch. I want to help save it, he corrected. I've done well for myself these past few years, made some smart investments. I have the capital to clear the mortgage and get this place running properly again. Suspicion flared. Why would you do that? Because it's a sound business decision. This land has potential. And, Zach sighed, and because I owe it to Thomas Reed. He gave me my first real job when no one else would take a chance on a skinny orphan. He taught me about ranching, about being a man of my word. The same man who ran you out of town and intercepted your letters to me. He thought he was protecting you, Zach said quietly. And maybe he was right. I needed to become the man I am now before I could be worthy of. He stopped, cleared his throat. Before I could be a proper partner in any venture. Willa studied him, trying to reconcile the passionate boy she'd once loved with this controlled, capable man. I'll consider it, she said finally, but I need to know exactly what happened 8 years ago, the whole truth. Zach nodded. Fair enough, but first let's check the rest of the property, see what we're dealing with. The afternoon passed in a thorough inspection of the ranch. The barn needed a new roof, the corral required several replaced rails, and the bunkhouse had suffered water damage from a leaky window. But as Zach had said, the foundations were solid, and the 30 remaining cattle looked healthy enough. Your father kept the best breeding stock, Zach explained as they watched the small herd graze in the western pasture. With proper management, you could triple their numbers in 2 years. 2 years is a long time when the bank wants payment in 2 weeks, Willa pointed out. That's where I come in. Zach leaned against the fence, his profile strong against the afternoon sun. I can clear the debt immediately and provide operating capital. In return, I'd want a 40% share of the ranch. 40%? Willa blinked in surprise. That's generous. Most investors would demand at least half. Most investors didn't grow up dreaming of this land, Zach said quietly. The simple statement hung between them, laden with meaning. Willa remembered the boy who'd looked at the Reed ranch with such longing, the orphan who'd never had a real home until Thomas Reed had hired him and given him the small room off the bunkhouse. You always loved this place, she acknowledged. I do. Zach straightened. Think about it, Willa. It's a fair offer and it lets you keep control. I will think about it, she promised. But first I need that explanation you promised, all of it. Zach nodded. Let's head back to the house. This isn't a short story. The kitchen was warm once Zach had built a fire in the old cast iron stove. Willa found coffee in the pantry, and they sat across from each other at the scarred wooden table, steam rising from their mugs like the ghosts of memories between them. I came to Whispering Pines when I was 16, Zach began. My parents died in a fire back in Missouri and I drifted west. Your father hired me as a general hand mucking stalls, mending fences, the jobs no one else wanted. But he saw something in me, I guess. Started teaching me about cattle, breeding, land management. Willa nodded. I remember, he said you had a natural eye for horseflesh. A small smile crossed Zach's face. He was a good teacher, and for a while I thought he saw me as, not a son exactly, but someone worthy of respect. He did, Willa insisted. He always spoke highly of you, until I fell in love with his daughter. Zach's eyes met hers directly. That changed everything. Willa's breath caught. They'd never spoken the word love during their brief, intense courtship. It had all been stolen kisses and whispered promises and the overwhelming certainty that they belonged together. We were so young, she said softly. Young, yes, but I knew what I felt. Zach took a sip of his coffee. The night of your 17th birthday, when we snuck down to the creek, and I remember, Willa interrupted, heat rising to her cheeks. Nothing improper happened, Zach said quickly, a smile tugging at his lips. But I kissed you for the first time and something shifted. For both of us, I think. Willa nodded, unable to deny it. That kiss had changed everything, awakened feelings she hadn't known she possessed, set her on a path that seemed destined to lead to forever. For the next year we were careful, Zach continued, meeting in secret, planning for the future. I saved every penny I earned, thinking I'd have enough to buy a small piece of land, build a cabin. I didn't need a cabin, Willa said. I would have followed you anywhere. Zach's expression softened. I know, that's what scared your father. The night before I disappeared, I approached him formally, told him I wanted to marry you, that I'd work myself to the bone to provide for you. What did he say? Willa asked, though she already knew the answer. He laughed. Then he got angry. Said I was nothing but an itinerant cowhand with delusions of grandeur. Said his daughter deserved a man of means, of standing. Willa flinched at the harshness of her father's words. That doesn't sound like him. He was protecting you the only way he knew how, Zach said. And when I argued, when I said you should have a choice in the matter, he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. What kind of offer? $500 to leave town immediately and never contact you again. Or he'd spread the word that I'd stolen from him, ensure I'd never find work in the territory. Willa gasped. That's blackmail. That's a father protecting his daughter from what he saw as a disastrous match. Zach ran a hand through his hair. I refused the money but agreed to leave. I couldn't risk being branded a thief, but I promised myself I'd make something of myself come back when I had something to offer you. So you left without a word to me, Willa said, the old hurt surfacing. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I thought you were dead or that everything between us had been a lie. I wrote to you, Zach reminded her. 6 letters explaining everything, begging you to wait for me if you could, but understanding if you couldn't. Letters I never received, Willa said bitterly. And when I didn't respond, I assumed you'd chosen to follow your father's wishes, Zach finished. It nearly broke me, Willa, but I kept my promise to myself. I joined the cavalry, served for 4 years, learned tracking, scouting, saved my pay. After my discharge, I used what I'd saved to buy into a small silver mine up in Montana. Got lucky we hit a good vein. I sold my share for a tidy profit, invested in land, cattle. You became a man of means, Willa said softly, enough to be worthy of Thomas Reed's daughter, yes. Zach's mouth twisted in a wry smile. The irony is, by the time I returned last year, you were married to another man and your father was struggling to keep this place afloat. Why did you come back at all? Willa asked. Zach was silent for a long moment. I told myself it was because I heard about good land opportunities in the area, but the truth is, I needed to see this place again, to see you even from a distance. But I wasn't here. No, you were in Denver with your merchant husband. There was no bitterness in his tone, just statement of fact. Your father didn't want to talk about you much, but Mrs. Holloway at the Mercantile was happy to fill me in on all the gossip. I'm sure she was, Willa said with a small smile. Martha Holloway was the town's most reliable source of information and misinformation. When I realized you weren't coming back, I bought land to the south, the old Winston place, started rebuilding it. Your father and I, we made our peace eventually. He was sick by then, his heart failing. I helped out when I could. He never mentioned you in his letters, Willa said. Would you have wanted to hear about me? The question hung in the air between them. Would she have wanted to know that Zachary Blackwood had returned successful and respected, that he was neighbors with her father? That he was still unmarried? I don't know, she admitted honestly. Zach nodded, accepting her answer. In his last few months, your father talked about you often. He regretted the rift between you, regretted sending you running into the arms of a traveling salesman. Edward was a good man, Willa said defensively. A kind husband. I'm sure he was, Zach said. Your father just wished you'd found happiness closer to home. The simple statement opened a well of grief Willa had kept carefully sealed. I was happy for a time. Then I lost everything in one terrible week. Zach reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly. I know what it is to lose everyone you love. Time helps, but it never fully heals. The warmth of his touch, the understanding in his eyes, they were a balm to wounds Willa had thought would never close. She pulled her hand away gently, needing to maintain some distance. So now you own the Winston Ranch, she said, changing the subject. I do, it's doing well. I've built up a herd of nearly 200 head, improved the bloodlines, added a horse breeding operation. And now you want to add my ranch to your holdings, Willa concluded. Zach shook his head. No, I want to help you save your inheritance. There's a difference. Why? After everything my father did, why would you want to help me? Zach's eyes held hers, gray-blue and unflinching. You know why, Willa. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Despite 8 years, despite all that had happened, something still existed between them, a connection that had never truly broken. I need time to think, Willa said, rising from the table. This is a lot to consider. Of course. Zach stood as well. I should get back to my place before dark. I can return tomorrow if you'd like, or you can send word to town when you've made a decision. Tomorrow, Willa decided. Come for lunch, I'll have an answer for you then. Zach nodded, settling his hat on his head. At the door he paused. Willa, yes. Whatever you decide about the ranch, I'm glad you're back. Whispering Pines hasn't been the same without you. Before she could respond, he was gone, the sound of the wagon wheels crunching on gravel marking his departure. Willa stood in the doorway of her childhood home, watching until he disappeared from sight, wondering how it was possible that after all this time, Zachary Blackwood still had the power to make her heart race like a startled deer. That night, Willa slept in her old bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of her youth. The quilt her mother had made, the small bookshelf filled with adventure stories and poetry. The cedar chest containing mementos, pressed flowers, a blue ribbon from the county fair, a small carved horse that Zach had given her for her 17th birthday. She held the wooden figure in her palm, remembering the day he'd presented it to her, proud and nervous. It's not much, he'd said, but I carved it myself. Thought it looked like that pinto mare you're so fond of. It did resemble Pepper, the spirited mare Willa had loved. The carving showed remarkable detail, the distinctive markings, the alert ears, the proud arch of the neck. It had been Zach's first gift to her, a token of affection before either of them had admitted deeper feelings. Willa placed the carving on the small table beside her bed and lay back, staring at the familiar cracks in the ceiling. Her mind whirled with revelations and possibilities. Her father had lied to her, intercepted letters, effectively ended her first love before it could truly begin. Yet he had done so believing he was protecting her, guiding her toward a better future. And now Zach was back, offering a partnership that could save her inheritance. But was it truly just a business proposition? The way he looked at her, the way he said her name, Willa Girl, with that special inflection that no one else had ever used, suggested his motivations weren't entirely financial. Did she want them to be? After Edward, after losing her son, Willa had sworn she would never make herself vulnerable again. The pain of loss was too great, the risk too high. She had come back to Whispering Pines to settle her father's affairs and perhaps start fresh somewhere else, San Francisco, perhaps, or even back east. But now, lying in her childhood bed with the scent of pine and sage drifting through the open window, Willa wondered if perhaps her fresh start was meant to be here after all. Not alone, but with the man who had once known her heart better than anyone. Morning brought clarity. Willa rose early, donned her simplest dress, and set about making the house livable again. She beat rugs, swept floors, opened windows to the fresh mountain air. In the kitchen, she took inventory of the pantry: flour, coffee, sugar, preserves, all the basics still in good supply. Her father might have been struggling financially, but he hadn't gone hungry. By noon, she had prepared a simple meal of rabbit stew and biscuits. The rabbit had come from a trap in the woods behind the house. Apparently, her father had continued the hunting habits of his younger days, and the trap had yielded fresh meat. The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Zach's arrival. He rode the chestnut gelding today rather than driving the wagon, and Willa watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted with fluid grace. He had dressed with care. She noted clean denims, a pressed shirt, his best hat. The observation made her smile. Some things hadn't changed. Zachary Blackwood had always been fastidious about his appearance when it mattered. "Something smells delicious," he said when she opened the door to his knock. "Rabbit stew," Willa replied. "My father's recipe, with the juniper berries." Zach asked, removing his hat as he stepped inside. Of course. Willa was surprised he remembered such a detail. "It's not rabbit stew without juniper berries, according to Thomas Reed. A philosophy I've adopted myself," Zach said with a smile. They settled at the kitchen table, the domesticity of the scene both strange and familiar. How many meals had they shared in this very room years ago? Dozens, perhaps hundreds, though never alone like this. There had always been her father's presence or other ranch hands, a buffer between them. "I've been thinking about your offer," Willa said after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes. And Zach's expression revealed nothing, but his knuckles whitened slightly around his fork. "I'll accept with conditions." Relief flickered across his face before his composure returned. "Name them." "First, I retain majority ownership 60% as you suggested. Second, all major decisions about the ranch are made jointly. Third, Willa hesitated, then plunged ahead. Third, this is a business arrangement only. Whatever was between us in the past stays in the past. Zach's eyes held hers for a long moment. Is that what you want, Willa? Truly, the directness of the question caught her off guard. It's what's sensible, she said finally. We're different people now. I'm a widow, you're a successful rancher. The children we were, the feelings we had, that was another lifetime. Was it? Zach set down his fork. Because when I saw you in the saloon, when I spoke your name, and you looked up at me with those eyes, the same eyes that have haunted my dreams for 8 years, it didn't feel like another lifetime. It felt like yesterday. Willa's heart thundered in her chest. Zach, I'm not asking for promises, Willa. I'm not even asking for a chance, not yet. All I'm saying is, don't close a door before you've even looked to see what's on the other side. His words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a plea wrapped in one. Willa took a steadying breath. The past has a way of coloring the present, she said carefully. We can't simply pretend the last 8 years didn't happen. I wouldn't want to, Zach replied. Those years made me who I am. They made you who you are, but they don't have to define what happens next. Willa studied him, this man who had once been the center of her world. He was right, they couldn't erase the past, but perhaps they could build something new on its foundation. All right, she said finally. I accept your terms, business partners first, and we'll see what comes next. The smile that broke across Zach's face was like sunrise in the mountains, gradual, then brilliant. I can work with that. They sealed the agreement with a handshake across the table, his large hand engulfing her smaller one. The touch lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Willa felt a warmth spread up her arm that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Now, Zach said, releasing her hand, let's talk about saving this ranch. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Zach cleared the mortgage with the bank, presenting Willa with the deed marked paid in full with a flourish that made her laugh despite herself. Together, they drew up formal partnership papers with the help of the town lawyer, establishing the Reed Blackwood Ranch as an official entity. Work on the property began immediately. Zach hired a crew to repair the barn roof and corral fencing, while Willa focused on restoring the house to its former state. They spent long days working side by side, falling into an easy rhythm that reminded Willa of their younger days, but with a new dimension of mutual respect and shared purpose. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, discussing plans for the ranch, which pastures to rotate the cattle through, whether to expand the chicken coop, how many additional horses they should purchase. We should consider Morgans for the breeding program, Zach suggested one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. They're versatile, good temperament, strong bloodlines. Expensive, though, Willa pointed out. Initially, yes. But they'll pay for themselves in the long run. Quality always does. Willa nodded, considering. My father always preferred quarter horses. For working cattle, there's none better, Zach agreed. But there's a growing market for carriage horses among the wealthy mine owners in Helena and Butte. Morgans would position us well for that market. Us, Willa repeated softly. The word still felt strange on her tongue. This new partnership, this shared future neither of them could have imagined a month ago. Zach glanced at her, his expression softening in the fading light. Is that all right? Saying us, it's just unexpected. A month ago, I was alone in Denver making plans to sell this place and move on. Now I'm half owner of a ranch with ambitious expansion plans. More than half owner, Zach corrected with a smile. 60%, remember, as if you'd let me forget. Willa returned his smile, then grew serious. Zach, why did you really come back to Whispering Pines, the whole truth this time? Zach was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. The honest answer, I never really left, not in here. He tapped his chest. This place, these mountains, it all stayed with me no matter how far I traveled. But you built a life elsewhere, you became successful. I did. And for a while, I thought that was enough. Then I heard about the Winston place being for sale and something just clicked. Like it was time to come full circle. And my father, you said you made peace with him, Zach nodded. He was different when I returned, older of course, but also, I don't know, softer maybe, regretful. When he realized I'd done well for myself, that I wasn't the same penniless boy who'd left, he seemed to look at me differently. Did he mention me? Willa asked quietly. Often. He kept your letters in a box by his bed, read them over and over. Zach hesitated. He was proud of you, Willa. But he missed you terribly. Tears pricked at Willa's eyes. I missed him too. I should have come home sooner, but after Edward and the baby died, I couldn't face any more loss. Without thinking, Zach reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. You're home now. That's what matters. The simple touch, the warmth of his hand around hers, sent a current of awareness through Willa's body. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand in his, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if they'd never been apart. They sat like that, hand in hand, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. No words were necessary in that moment, just the comfort of connection, the promise of possibilities to come. As summer deepened into fall, the Reed Blackwood ranch began to show signs of revival. The repaired barn gleamed with fresh paint, the expanded chicken coop bustled with activity, and the small herd of cattle grew with the addition of 20 head purchased from a rancher retiring to California. Willa found herself settling back into ranch life with surprising ease. The rhythms of the days rising with the sun, tending to animals, managing the household felt right in a way her life in Denver never had. She discovered that the skills her father had taught her, how to judge a horse's soundness, how to predict weather from the way the wind shifted, how to negotiate with cattle buyers, remained sharp despite years of disuse. Zach, true to his word, treated her as a full partner in all ranch decisions. He sought her opinion, valued her judgment, and never once suggested that certain tasks might be too difficult for a woman, an attitude Edward, for all his kindness, had never quite overcome. Their partnership evolved naturally into friendship as the weeks passed. The wariness Willa had felt at first, the protective shell she'd built around her heart, began to soften in the face of Zach's steady presence. They shared meals, worked side by side, and gradually, tentatively, began to share pieces of the lives they'd lived during their years apart. Zach told her about his time with the cavalry, the harsh winters in Dakota Territory, the friendships forged in hardship, the Sioux scout named Running Elk, who had taught him tracking skills that had later saved his life. In turn, Willa spoke of Denver, the bustling city so different from Whispering Pines, the cultured society Edward had introduced her to, the brief joy of motherhood before it was cruelly snatched away. John would have been 3 next month, she said quietly one evening as they sat by the fire, autumn's chill having driven them indoors. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear him crying. Zach's eyes were full of compassion. What was he like? The question surprised her. Most people avoided mentioning her son, as if speaking of him might somehow worsen her grief, but Zach watched her steadily, genuinely wanting to know. He was vibrant, Willa said, a small smile touching her lips at the memory. Even as a tiny baby, he seemed to take in everything, those big brown eyes so serious and curious. He had Edward's coloring but my stubbornness. Started walking at 9 months because he was too impatient to wait. Sounds like someone else I know, Zach said with a gentle smile. I remember a certain young lady who couldn't wait for her father to teach her to ride, climbed on a half-broke pony, and nearly got herself killed. Willa laughed softly. I'd forgotten about that. Papa was so angry he couldn't speak for an hour. And then he went out and bought you the gentlest mare in the county because he knew you'd just try again if he didn't. Pepper, Willa said fondly. I wonder what happened to her. Your father sold her to the Hendersons when she got too old for ranch work. Last I heard, she was happily carrying their youngest daughter around their paddock. Willa blinked back sudden tears. Thank you for telling me that. It's good to know she had a comfortable old age. Zach nodded, understanding the emotion behind her words. In the flickering firelight, his face was all plains and shadows, more handsome than the boy she'd loved, but with the same essential goodness in his eyes. What? He asked, noticing her study. I was just thinking how different you are from the boy I knew. And yet, in all the ways that matter, exactly the same. Is that good or bad? Zach asked, his voice light but his eyes serious. Good, Willa said softly. Definitely good. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Zach leaned forward slightly, his eyes dropping to her lips, and Willa felt herself drawn toward him as if by some invisible force. The sudden bang of the door being blown open by a gust of wind shattered the moment. Zach rose quickly to secure it, and when he returned to his seat, the intimate atmosphere had dissipated, replaced by a careful politeness that both frustrated and relieved Willa. She wasn't ready, she told herself. Not yet. But for the first time since losing Edward and John, she could imagine a future where her heart might heal enough to love again. October brought the cattle drive a small operation compared to the great drives to the railheads, but significant for the fledgling Reed Blackwood ranch. They would take their market-ready steers to Helena, where prices were better than the local buyers offered. "Are you sure you want to come along?" Zach asked as they prepared for the 3-day journey. "It's going to be cold, uncomfortable, and we'll be sleeping on the ground." Willa fixed him with a determined look. "I've been on cattle drives before, Zachary Blackwood. I may have spent a few years in city dresses, but I haven't forgotten how to sit a horse from sunup to sundown." Zach raised his hands in surrender, a grin spreading across his face. "Just checking." Most of the men have never worked with a female trail boss before. "Then it's high time they learned," Willa said, matching his grin with her own. "Besides, it's my 60% of the cattle we're driving." "As if you'd let me forget," Zach echoed her words from weeks before, and they both laughed. The drive itself proved challenging but exhilarating. Willa had indeed forgotten how it felt to spend an entire day in the saddle, and her muscles protested vigorously the first night. But there was a satisfaction in the work that no city convenience could match: the skill of keeping the herd together, the partnership with a good horse, the vast beauty of the Montana landscape stretching in all directions. The 3 cowboys Zach had hired: Joe Pickett, a weathered veteran of many drives, Miguel Sanchez, a skilled horseman from Texas, and young Billy Watson, barely 18 but eager to prove himself, were initially skeptical of taking orders from a woman. But Willa's competence soon won their respect, and by the second day, they were responding to her directions as readily as to Zach's. They made camp the second night in a sheltered valley, the cattle settled in a natural basin nearby. After a hearty meal of beans, bacon, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, the men rolled into their blankets, leaving Willa and Zach sitting by the fire. "You've impressed them," Zach said quietly, nodding toward the sleeping cowboys. "Joe told me he's never seen a woman handle cattle so well." "High praise from a man of so few words," Willa replied, warmed by the compliment. "He's right, though. You're a natural at this, Willa. The ranch is thriving with you at the helm." "With us at the helm," she corrected, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders as the night air grew colder. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Zach. You know that." "You'd have found a way," he said with certainty. "You're the most determined person I've ever known. Perhaps. But I'm glad I didn't have to." Willa gazed into the dying fire. "These past months, they've been healing in a way I didn't expect." Zach added another small log to the flames, sending sparks spiraling upward to join the stars. "For me too." Willa glanced at him, curious. "What wounds did you need to heal?" He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, 8 years is a long time to carry regret, Willa. To wonder what might have been if I'd been braver, more persistent, if I'd stayed and fought for what I wanted instead of leaving." "You did what you thought was right," Willa said softly. "What my father forced you to do. Maybe, but I've always wondered if I should have told you anyway, found a way to get a message to you, asked you to wait. Would you have wanted me to?" Willa asked. "To put my life on hold for years, waiting for a man who might never return," Zach shook his head. "No, that wouldn't have been fair. But I could have given you the choice instead of disappearing and leaving you to wonder." "We can't change the past," Willa said, echoing his own words from months before. "But we're here now. That counts for something, doesn't it?" "It counts for everything," Zach replied, his voice low and intense. In the firelight, his eyes were dark and serious. "Willa," a sudden commotion from the cattle interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Both of them were on their feet instantly, alert to the sounds of distress from the herd. "Something spooked them," Zach said, already moving toward his horse. Wake the men. We need to keep them from stampeding. The next hours were a blur of activity. A mountain lion had wandered too close to the herd, setting off a chain reaction of panic among the nervous cattle. It took all 5 of them riding hard in the darkness to keep the steers contained and calm them gradually. By dawn, the crisis had passed, but they were all exhausted. The drive continued, but the moment of intimacy by the fire was lost, replaced by the practical concerns of getting their cattle safely to market. In Helena, their efforts were rewarded with excellent prices, the highest the market had seen in 3 years, according to the buyer. Willa couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as she watched the transaction, knowing that their small ranch was now on solid financial footing. "We should celebrate," Zach suggested as they finished the paperwork in the buyer's office. "There's a decent restaurant at the hotel. Real food, real chairs, real beds for the night before we head back tomorrow." The thought of a proper meal and a soft bed was too tempting to resist. Willa agreed, and after securing rooms for themselves and their men, they parted to clean up after days on the trail. The hot bath provided by the hotel was heaven after the dust and sweat of the cattle drive. Willa soaked until the water cooled, then dressed in the one good outfit she'd packed: a forest green skirt and matching jacket over a cream-colored blouse. She pinned her hair up as neatly as she could without a lady's maid, applied a touch of rose-scented powder, and surveyed the result in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her was not the grieving widow who had arrived in Whispering Pines months before. There was color in her cheeks, life in her eyes. The Montana sun had kissed her skin golden, and ranch work had put strength back into her body. She looked alive, perhaps even beautiful. The thought made her blush, and she chided herself for vanity. Yet as she made her way downstairs to meet Zach, she couldn't help hoping he would notice the difference too. He was waiting in the hotel lobby, and the sight of him made her pause on the stairs. Zach had cleaned up impressively, his dark hair still damp from washing, his face clean-shaven for the first time in days, his tall frame clothed in a well-cut suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. He looked like the successful businessman he had become, yet there was still something untamed about him, something essentially of the West that no Eastern tailor could disguise. He glanced up, saw her on the stairs, and his expression transformed with such obvious admiration that Willa felt warmth spread through her entire body. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she reached him. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up rather well yourself." He offered his arm with a small bow that was only half teasing. "Shall we, Mrs. Carson?" Willa hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. "I think, given the circumstances, you should call me Miss Reed tonight." Zach's eyebrows rose in surprise, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Miss Reed it is." The restaurant was the finest Helena had to offer: white tablecloths, crystal glasses, a French chef imported at great expense by a hotel owner determined to bring civilization to the Montana territory. They were seated at a quiet corner table, a candle flickering between them. "This feels very far from the campfire last night," Willa observed as a waiter poured wine into their glasses. "In the best possible way," Zach agreed, raising his glass. "To the Reed Blackwood Ranch." "May this be the first of many successful ventures." Willa touched her glass to his. "To partnership." They dined on cuisine that would have been respectable even in Denver: roast duck with cherry sauce, tender vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven. The wine was excellent, imported from California vineyards, and Willa found herself relaxing as the meal progressed, the trials of the cattle drive fading into pleasant exhaustion. "I've been thinking about expansion," Zach said as they lingered over dessert, a delicate apple tart with vanilla cream. "With the profits from this drive, we could increase the herd significantly by spring." "Always the businessman," Willa teased. "Can't we simply enjoy our success for one evening before planning the next conquest?" Zach laughed, the sound rich and warm in the intimate space. "You're right. Tonight is for celebration, not strategy." He raised his glass again. "To you, Willa Reed, the finest partner a man could ask for." The warmth in his eyes as he said it made Willa's breath catch. This was dangerous territory, she knew. The careful boundaries they had established were blurring in the candlelight, the wine, the satisfaction of shared achievement. "Zach," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "I know," he said softly. "We agreed, business partners first. And yet." "And yet," he echoed, his eyes never leaving hers, the moment stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither had allowed themselves to voice. "Would you like to take a walk?" Zach asked suddenly. "The night air might clear our heads." Willa nodded, grateful for the suggestion. They settled their bill and stepped out into the cool October evening. Helena was a bustling city by Montana standards, but at this hour, the streets were relatively quiet. Gas lamps cast pools of golden light, and the stars above were brilliant in the clear mountain sky. They walked in companionable silence for a time, their breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Willa was acutely aware of Zach beside her, his height, his warmth, the way he unconsciously adjusted his stride to match hers. "I never thanked you properly," she said finally. "For what?" "For coming back, for saving the ranch, she hesitated, "for giving me a reason to start living again." Zach stopped walking, turning to face her. "Willa, no, let me finish," she said, needing to get the words out. "After Edward and John died, I thought that part of my life was over. The part where I felt things, wanted things, hoped for things. I came back to Whispering Pines expecting to settle my father's affairs and then exist, just exist. I didn't expect to find purpose again, joy again." "Have you?" Zach asked quietly. "Found joy?" Willa met his gaze directly. "Yes." "With the ranch, she took a deep breath. "With you." Zach's expression softened, hope and caution warring in his eyes. "Willa, I don't want to rush you. I know you've been through so much." "We both have," she acknowledged. "But standing here with you now, I can't help feeling that maybe all those years apart, all those separate paths we took, were somehow leading us back to each other." "I've felt that way since the moment I saw you in the saloon," Zach admitted. "When I spoke your name, and you looked up at me with those eyes I've never been able to forget." Willa smiled at the memory. "I didn't recognize you at first, but when you said my name the way only you have ever said it, something inside me just knew." Zach reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "What are you saying, Willa girl?" The old endearment, spoken in that particular way that had always been uniquely his, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm saying that perhaps it's time to reconsider the terms of our partnership," she said softly. "The part about the past staying in the past." Zach's hand cradled her cheek, his touch gentle but sure. "Are you certain? Because once we open that door, I'm certain," Willa interrupted. "I've been certain for weeks, maybe months. I was just afraid. And now I'm still afraid," she admitted with a small laugh, "but I'm more afraid of never knowing what might have been. Again." Zach's smile was slow and beautiful, transforming his entire face. "Willa Reed," he said, his voice a caress, "may I kiss you? Properly this time, not like those stolen moments by the creek when we were hardly more than children." "Yes," Willa whispered. "Please." He bent his head to hers, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Their lips met gently at first, a question and an answer all at once. Then, as Willa's arms slid up around his neck, the kiss deepened into something more profound, a homecoming, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Willa kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. "Worth waiting 8 years for?" Zach asked, a hint of his old mischief in his voice. Willa opened her eyes to find him watching her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "I'm not sure," she teased. "I might need more evidence before making a final determination." Zach laughed and pulled her close again. "I'm happy to provide as much evidence as necessary, Miss Reed, for scientific purposes, of course." "Of course," Willa agreed solemnly, then dissolved into laughter against his chest. They stood in the circle of a gas lamp's glow, holding each other close, neither willing to break the spell of the moment. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Willa felt completely, utterly right, as if all the scattered pieces of her life had suddenly aligned into a pattern that made perfect sense. The journey back to Whispering Pines seemed both longer and shorter than the trip to Helena had been. Longer because Willa was eager to return to their ranch, and begin this new chapter. Shorter because every moment with Zach now held a new dimension of joy, a sense of rediscovered connection that made time slip by unnoticed. They maintained a certain propriety in front of the men, but Willa caught Joe Pickett giving them knowing looks when Zach helped her mount her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Old Joe's no fool," Zach murmured as they rode side by side. "He's probably planning what to wear to the wedding already." Willa blushed, but didn't contradict him. The thought of marriage, once a closed door in her mind, now seemed like a natural progression, a step toward the future rather than a painful echo of the past. They arrived home late on the third day, tired but satisfied with the success of their venture. The ranch looked welcoming in the fading light, the freshly painted buildings, the smoke curling from the chimney where Mrs. Gunderson, the widow they'd hired as housekeeper, would be preparing dinner. "Home," Willa said softly as they rode into the yard. Zach reached across the space between their horses and took her hand briefly. "Home," he agreed. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as they invested their profits wisely, expanding the herd and improving the property. But there were quieter moments, 2 evenings by the fire when Zach would read aloud from one of Willa's favorite books. Sunday rides to the high meadow where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing autumn. Stolen kisses that grew increasingly difficult to keep brief. The town noticed the change in their relationship, of course. Whispering Pines was too small for secrets. But instead of the disapproval, Willa had half feared a widow finding happiness so soon after her bereavement. There seemed to be a general sense of rightness about their reunion. As Martha Holloway put it while measuring fabric for new curtains in the ranch house, "Some things are just meant to be, dear. Everyone can see you two belong together." Always did. Winter came early that year, the first heavy snow falling in late November. The ranch settled into the slower rhythms of the cold season, feeding livestock, maintaining buildings, planning for spring. Willa found she loved these quieter days, the enforced intimacy of being snowbound with Zach, the long evenings of conversation and companionship. On Christmas Eve, Zach rode out early, saying he had business in town. He returned late in the afternoon as twilight was gathering, his horse's hooves making almost no sound in the deep snow. Willa met him on the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl. "I was beginning to worry," she said, helping him brush snow from his coat. "The sky looks like more is coming." "Worth the risk," Zach said, his eyes bright with some secret anticipation. "I had important business on Christmas Eve." "What business could possibly this business?" Zach interrupted, pulling a small box from his pocket. In the lantern light, his face was solemn yet joyful as he sank to one knee in the snow. "Willa Reed, I've loved you since I was 18 years old. I've loved you through separation and silence, through success and failure, through joy and heartbreak. I want to love you for the rest of my days, if you'll let me." Willa's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "I'm not the penniless boy your father sent away," Zach continued, "but I'm still the man who loves you more than his own life. Will you marry me, Willa girl? Make me the happiest man in Montana territory." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a perfect diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires the exact color of Willa's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Zachary Blackwood, I will marry you." Zach's face broke into a radiant smile as he rose, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. Their kiss was a seal on the promise, warm despite the falling snow, perfect in its rightness. "Merry Christmas, my love," Zach murmured against her lips. "Merry Christmas," Willa replied, her heart too full for more elaborate words. They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the small church in Whispering Pines. The whole town turned out for the celebration, everyone agreeing it was the most romantic story they'd ever witnessed. The childhood sweethearts reunited after years apart, building a new life together on the land they both loved. Willa wore a gown of ivory satin that Martha Holloway had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned her mother's wedding dress. Zach looked impossibly handsome in a new suit ordered specially from Helena, his eyes never leaving his bride as she walked down the aisle to him. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish and support each other through whatever life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed her with such tender passion that several of the older ladies dabbed at their eyes, declaring it the most touching thing they'd ever seen. The reception at the Sweetwater Saloon, closed to regular business for the occasion, lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than the small town had seen in one place since the 4th of July celebration. "Are you happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Zach asked as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Completely," Willa answered, marveling at how right the new name felt. "And you, Mr. Blackwood, more than I ever thought possible," he said, his arms tightening around her. "And this is just the beginning." He was right. Their life together unfolded like a story neither could have imagined in their youngest days, rich in work and love, challenges and triumphs, all shared equally between them. The Reed Blackwood Ranch prospered under their joint management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. Their methods, progressive for the time, drew attention from other ranchers, and soon Zach was being asked to share his expertise across the territory. Willa, meanwhile, established a horse breeding program that became renowned for producing some of the finest stock in Montana. Her eye for good bloodlines, combined with Zach's skill in training, created a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as St. Louis and Chicago. Their greatest joy, however, came in the summer of 1878, when Willa gave birth to twins, a boy they named Thomas Edward, after both their fathers, and a girl they called Elizabeth Grace for their mothers. The children grew strong and healthy in the mountain air, surrounded by love and the freedom of ranch life. As the years passed, the Reed Blackwood Ranch expanded to include the original Winston property Zach had purchased, creating one of the largest holdings in the valley. They built a new, larger house halfway between the two original homesteads, a beautiful home with wide porches and big windows that looked out on the mountains in every direction. On warm summer evenings, Willa and Zach would often sit on the porch swing after the children were in bed, watching the sunset paint the peaks gold and crimson. Sometimes they would talk about the future, their hopes for the children, plans for the ranch, dreams still to be fulfilled. Other times they would simply sit in companionable silence, holding hands, content in the life they had built together. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Willa asked one such evening, 20 years after their wedding. Their twins were grown now, Thomas running much of the ranch operations, Elizabeth recently married to a young doctor in Helena. "Different how?" Zach asked, his arm around her shoulders, his hair now showing strands of silver at the temples. "If my father hadn't sent you away." "If we'd married young as we planned." Zach considered the question thoughtfully. "I used to wonder that all the time, but now I think perhaps it happened exactly as it needed to." "How so?" "We needed those years apart to become the people who could build this life together." He gestured toward their home, the prosperous ranch, the mountains beyond. "The boy I was couldn't have given you this. He needed to become a man first, to learn his own strength." Willa nodded, understanding. "And I needed to learn that life goes on, even after loss. That the heart can heal and love again, perhaps even more deeply." "Exactly." Zach turned to look at her, his eyes still holding the same warmth they had when they were young. "Besides, the best stories are the ones where people find their way back to each other against all odds." "Is that what we did?" Willa asked with a smile. "Found our way back to each other. I prefer to think we were never really lost," Zach said, drawing her closer. "Just taking a scenic detour on the way to where we were always meant to be." Willa rested her head on his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "I like that, a scenic detour." "With a perfect destination," Zach added, pressing a kiss to her temple. As twilight deepened into darkness, and the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Willa thought about the long, winding path that had led her home, not just to this place, but to this man, this life. She thought about the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and all the joy and sorrow that had shaped her journey. And when Zach spoke her name in that special way that had always been uniquely his, Willa girl, with the same tenderness he had used the first time, the 100th time, the 1000th time, she knew with absolute certainty that every step of that journey had been worth it. For this was where she belonged. Not just on this land that had been in her blood since childhood, but in the arms of this man who had loved her across time and distance, who had spoken her name like no one else ever could, who had found her again when she thought all hope of such happiness was lost. This was home. This was love. This was the happy ending that had been waiting for them all along.